In the Western media, we're bombarded with frightening and negative images of Islam every day. Islam is often depicted as a threatening force connected with unbending fundamentalism, repression, or terrorism. Alongside that, there is the disapproval or outright banning of music by the fundamentalists. But there is another strand of Islam where music is placed at the heart of religious devotion. Sufism is the popular, mystical form of Islam with millions of followers around the world. When I first moved to South Asia 20 years ago, Sufism was a revelation to me and overturned all my preconceptions about Islam. It's peace-loving, tolerant, and pluralistic.
Sufism is an antidote to all the negative stereotypes of Islam. Since the very earliest days of the faith, the Sufis have produced some of the most beautiful art, poetry, and music. Like the troubadours of the medieval West, they've spread their word through music, and although always opposed by the Orthodox and by Puritans, they still are hugely popular across the Islamic world. This is a journey to the other side of Islam.
Sain Zahor is a sort of holy minstrel who sings in praise of God at Sufi shrines in Pakistan. The paths of love are long and complicated, he sings, for it is love rather than fear of God that lies at the heart of Sufism. But the use of music brings condemnation from Islamic hardliners who, like the English Puritans of the 17th century, see music as a distraction from God.
But there's actually nothing in the Quran which specifically forbids music, and later Muslim writings on the subject are sufficiently ambiguous for there to have been hundreds of years of discussion. But for the Sufis, music and poetry remain intrinsic to their faith. It's their way of drawing closer to God and so reaching a state of spiritual ecstasy.
Across the Islamic world, Sufi music takes many very different forms. It fuses with local traditions to form widely varying regional colours and sounds. In this programme, I'm going to explore the roots of this extraordinary musical force and see some of the highlights of Sufi music in action. It's music that has also attracted millions of non-Muslim fans, thanks to its thrilling, ecstatic power. Exactly when and where Sufism began is difficult to say. But Islam and Christianity evolved from much the same roots in the same place: the deserts and villages of the Middle East. Here in Syria, in the Byzantine period, Christian hermits came in droves to live in caves, to wander in the desert, and to sit on pillars as stylites. By dint of their suffering, these saints were seen to have won direct access to the divine.
After the Islamic conquest and the conversion of Syria, people continued to expect their holy men to behave in this manner, and the very word Sufi seems to hint at this direct continuity with Christianity. For Suf is the Arabic word for wool, a reference to the clothing worn by the Desert Fathers and taken over from them by the very first Sufis.
It's often forgotten that Islam adopted a lot from the early Christians. The month-long Lenten feast became Ramadan, and the practice of removing shoes before entering a shrine. Here, at the Christian convent of Saidnaya, Muslims also come to pray, and you can see this confluence of religions in action. while Orthodox Muslims believe God should only be approached directly through prayers in the mosque, the Sufis often feel more comfortable going through the intermediary of a saint, in this case, the Virgin Mary. Now, in the world of the clash of civilizations and the neocons and 9/11 and so on, all this seems something extraordinary, but it is, of course, the old way in the Middle East. Muslims and Christians and Sephardic Jews have been sharing shrines and venerating the same holy men for centuries. It's here, in this wonderfully plural culture compost of the Middle East, that Sufism has its roots. The first Sufis were hermits in the desert, but by the 8th century they'd gathered in the new Muslim towns. There are written records of these early Sufi brotherhoods surviving, showing that they already used music in their devotions. I've come to the city of Aleppo in the north of Syria. It's a place where there are literally hundreds of Sufi lodges tucked away in the winding streets of the old city. Here you can get some idea of what the chanting and rituals of these first Sufi brotherhoods might have sounded like. On different days of the week in Aleppo, different Sufi brotherhoods hold what they call a zikr, literally a remembrance of God, with prayers, chanting and drumming. Though it may all sound a bit like a rugby warm-up song, it's going back to the deepest roots of Sufism. Instruments are stripped away, and God's name is repeated over and over again. What's interesting is it is, of course, a link with early Christian monasticism, the Byzantine monks, for whom the Jesus prayer, repeating Jesus' name over and over again, was at the very centre of their spirituality. In the next part of my journey, I'm off to find out about Rumi, the mystic who's best known for spreading the Sufi message worldwide. In Konya, a small town in Turkey, is the shrine of the Sufi mystic who, above all others, has come to represent the ideals of Sufism worldwide. He is Jalaluddin Rumi, or Mevlana, which means our Lord. He was born in what is now Afghanistan, but made Konya his home in the mid-13th century. His shrine and tomb here attract pilgrims from all over the world. While remaining a sincere Muslim, Rumi emphasized that rituals and fasting were for the pious, but love was everywhere, and was much the surest route to the divine. The fact that Rumi was the best-selling poet in America in the 1990s is an indication of his contemporary appeal.
Rumi's message is timeless. I mean, he lived in the 13th century, but today, all around the world, his books are translated and spreading because he thinks about forgiveness, peace, and self-understanding, self-respect. And I think when you look what's going on today around the world, more than ever, it's very applicable for everyone. It doesn't matter what's your cultural background.
Rumi has always been the most universal of Muslim thinkers. In all his writings, you have this idea that as God is located in the human heart, you don't need ritual to get to him, that he's as accessible to Christians and to Jews as he is to Muslims.
Rumi's followers, the Mevlevi Sufis, spread to Istanbul and throughout the Ottoman Empire. They became better known around the world as the whirling dervishes. Their whirling rituals were intended to focus their minds on the God within.
the whirling ritual of the whirling dervishes. We don't say it's a dance, it's a prayer. Everything is whirling in the world, from the smallest cell up to the galaxies of the universe. Everything is turning. Our whirling is to join to this universal prayer. Whirling is not difficult. Everybody can whirl. At the beginning, some get dizzy, but after 1 month, 2 months, suddenly you become comfortable.
The music for this ritual, called the sema, comes from Ottoman classical tradition. Most of the instrumental pieces and settings of Rumi's poetry were composed in the 18th and 19th centuries. The ceremony has now become rather formalised, but what set Rumi whirling was something much more everyday. There's a story of Rumi walking through the metalworkers' bazaar in Konya and being overwhelmed by the sound of the beating hammers. This is when it's said he first started whirling, carried away by the rhythm into an ecstatic dance. "Come, but don't join us without your music," he writes. "We have a celebration. Rise and beat the drums." "We are drunk, but not from wine. This is the night of the sema, when we whirl to ecstasy." There is light now. There is light. There is light. Music is a vital part of Rumi's philosophy. His most famous poem begins with the sound of the reed flute, the ney. "Listen to the ney," he writes, "how it laments its separation from the reed bed. It's a wonderful symbol for man's separation from God." Kutsi Ergüne comes from a long line of Turkish ney players. Thanks to Rumi, the ney is nothing less than an allegory for mankind.
When the reed flute is not played, so it doesn't have any spirit in it.
Okay.
So the human being is the same situation when there's not the inspiration of God. There's no any harmony, any melody in him.
For Sufis, breath is actually a very important symbol, isn't it? It's a symbol of life.
Symbol of the life, symbol of the spirit, with the symbol of the animation of the material. And that's why in Sufi ceremonies with the whirling dervishes, the ney becomes the breath who invokes the name of God.
Sema ceremony is a way to reach ecstasy. It's 4 parts. First part means towards God. Second part, with God. And the third part, in God. This third part represents the ecstasy. The fourth part represents coming back. At the end, we try to understand our mission. The most important message of Rumi is unity. And he said, we have come to unite, not to divide.
In 1925, as part of his program to create a modern, Western-orientated secular state, the new Republican leader Kemal Ataturk banned the Sufi orders and closed their meeting halls, their tekkes. This one, ironically by the Mevlana Gate of the old walls of Istanbul, was used as an orphanage and warehouse before falling into ruin. Others, like the Galata Tekke in the centre of Istanbul, have become museums. As far as the Turkish state is concerned, the Mevlevi are little more than a museum culture to be exploited as a tourist attraction.
What's happening at this Sufi tekke in Istanbul highlights the central paradox of modern Turkey's relationship with Sufism. On one hand, the state is very keen to promote whirling dervishes as a sort of folkloric dance activity. On the other hand, they still ban real Sufism as a religious force.
Of course, the effect of the ban on Sufism has been to drive it underground.
We've come tonight to a rather nondescript-looking apartment block on the outskirts of town to see a Sufi Brotherhood meeting in a flat here. Except that in this particular case, it looks as if underground means 9 stories up and no lift.
Although there are groups of Sufis like this one meeting all over Istanbul, it was surprisingly hard to find one that would agree to be filmed. No one's been arrested for one of these ceremonies for years, but there's still a nervousness in Turkey about openly being a Sufi.
Not that much hidden now, because in the 1940s, 50s or 60s it was underground because it was very dangerous. You could go in prison for 6 or 7 months because you are doing a religious ceremony which is forbidden. So it is still forbidden, but we know that it's tolerated now.
Maybe some indication of the changing climate is the cult success in Turkey and across Europe and America of the club Sufi Mercan Dede. For Mercan, the seemingly radical combination of electronic beats and Sufi philosophy goes right back to Rumi.
Rumi has a beautiful saying. He says that we are all cross-eyed people. We see everything separate. But then when you start to look rightly, nothing is really separated. Everything is one. And the essence of Sufism is unifying things, not really separate them. In my first gig, I remember, I just put this beautiful sound of an A with a really good underground techno beats, and whole energy in the dance changed, and I realized that the electronic music and the Sufi music, they just tell the same story. They're using different languages.
There is this palpable palpable stillness at the center of the whirling that exists, that you can tap into. And you feel as if you're in the eye of the hurricane. Everyone disappears, and it feels easier to remain whirling than to stop.
DJing, you look at the dance floor, there are black people, white people, Jewish people, Muslim people, gay, straight, young, old, and it did not matter. In that one single space, you just realize that in the essence we are all the same. And that idea is exactly the essence of Sufism, is unifying the people and not worrying about, who we think we are. I consider myself just a student, learning every single day. Like a little kid actually playing with the stones in the shore, and there's this whole ocean, what we call Sufism.
This is Lahore, one of my favorite cities and the cultural and artistic capital of Pakistan. It's an incredibly lively and vibrant place, famous for its Punjabi food and, of course, its music. Here, it's the dole drum that drives the local Bhangra sound. It's the heartbeat, in many ways the soundtrack to the city. Chale, let's go. I've heard the dole used endlessly in Bhangra, but I've come to Lahore to see how it's used in one of the city's Sufi shrines. Every Thursday night, the night before the Muslim holy day, this is the ritual at the Baba Shah Jamal shrine. Drummers with their huge dole drums work spectators and devotees into a frenzy. What it immediately reminds me of course, is the whirling dervishes we've seen in Turkey. But it's less refined, more raw, and much more elemental. This must have been what it was originally like in Rumi's day. In the 13th century, it wasn't a kind of classical ballet. It was this real primeval feeling which led people to wajj, to ecstasy. And in that sense, it's very exciting. It's like looking through a window into a lost period of Sufi history. If there's one figure who's completely synonymous with the Sufi music of Pakistan, it is, of course, Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. He was a huge figure in every sense of the word. I once saw him perform towards the end in Scotland, and he had to be virtually winched onto the stage. But he was the great ambassador of Sufi music. He died in 1997, aged only 49. But as you can see here, he left behind him an extraordinary array of CDs. We must have about 200 here.
Yes.
Does he still sell? Is he remembered?
Yes, this Nusrat is number one.
Still number one?
Yes,
Fantastic.
this is number one.
The style of music Nusrat performed is called Qawwali, a distinctive fusion of devotional poetry and Hindustani music. Largely thanks to Nusrat, it's become probably the best-known style of Sufi music in the world.
मैं पहली बार खान साहब के साथ यूनाइटेड किंगडम के टूर पे गया। वो बहुत बड़ा मुझे एक एक्सपीरियंस हुआ कि इस तरह भी होता है कि लोग बोली समझ रहे ना होने के बावजूद भी जो दिल से जो बात बंदा कह रहा है उसको वो समझ रहे होते हैं.
Nusrat's music reached an even wider audience when Must Must was used for a Coca-Cola ad. Some criticised him for using spiritual music, praising a great Sufi saint, to sell fizzy drinks. But Nusrat took a different view.
जब हम गाते हैं तो एक पैगाम होता है जो भाईचारे का, मोहब्बत का, अपनी मीडिया के तहत अपनी आवाज़ को और अपने पैगाम को वो पहुंचाना चाहते थे, तो ये इससे बेस्ट तरीका मुझे नज़र नहीं आया.
Sufi music and poetry was hugely important in bringing the message of Islam to a wider audience as the new religion slowly began to be adopted by a predominantly Hindu population from the 12th century onwards. This piece was composed in the 13th century by the Sufi poet and musician Amir Khusro. It's believed to be the first ever qawwali. In performance, qawwali singers often spontaneously incorporate the words of other poets such as Rumi.
To hear the song still sung in a saint's shrine, in a living shrine where people still come with their most profound hopes and fears, is to have the thing put in context. This is where they were written, and this is where they are still best heard performed.
Sometimes the words of the qawwali text are broken down to fragments and syllables, the name of the saint being repeated over and over again. Amir Khusro, the creator of qawwali, is buried in Delhi. He's regarded as one of the great fathers of North Indian classical music. It's a sign of the respect in which he is held that his tomb stands next to that of his great Sufi master, Nizamuddin Aulia, one of the most venerated of all Indian saints. For me, this is coming home. For 5 years I used to live around the corner from here, and it's where I first heard Sufi music, and was amazed to discover a form of Islam so very different from anything the prejudices of my upbringing had led me to expect.
यही चीज़ तो प्यारी लगी यहाँ पे, न हिंदू, न मुसलमान, न सिख, न ईसाई, सभी धर्म के आ सकते हैं और सभी धर्म के इकट्ठे होकर उस प्रभु से प्रार्थना कर सकते हैं. यहाँ एक मिल्लत का ऐसा चिराग मिला मोहब्बत का, न वो हिंदू है, न मुसलमान है, न वो सिख है, न ईसाई है, उसका सच्चा नूर बैठा है.
I've been living in and writing about India for nearly 20 years now, and during that time there's been a depressing amount of violence between Hindus and Muslims. And against this background, a place like Nizamuddin, I think, is terribly, terribly important, because this is still a place where Hindus and Muslims, Sikhs and Christians all come together to pray,
to bring their most profound wishes to the saint and to listen to qawwalis, all sitting down together. So here you have Sufism not as something sort of fluffy and otherworldly, but something that actually, in a concrete way, acts as a balm on India's festering religious wounds. Just as the use of music and the veneration of saints has brought many Sufis closer to their Hindu and Christian neighbours, so it has also acted to divide them from their more orthodox Muslim brothers. Today in Pakistan, at the opposite end of the spectrum from the Sufis, hardline Islam has become a powerful force due to the influence of Saudi-funded madrasas and the legacy of the jihad in Afghanistan. It's Islam with an uncompromising political agenda.
सदर बुश ने पूछा था जनरल परवेज मुशर्रफ से कि तुम किसके साथ मेरा साथ देते हो या अफगानिस्तान का या तालिबान का.
This is the Lahore headquarters of the Jamaat-e-Islami, the most powerful of all the religious political parties. They deny Saudi funding, but see the Sufi veneration of saints as idolatrous and, of course, condemn their use of music.
ये जो म्यूज़िक है, ये जो साज है, ये जो तबला सरंगी है, ये ढोल धमाके हैं, ये जाहिर बात है कि आदमी को आखिरत से गाफिल करते हैं, दीन से गाफिल करते हैं, और इनका नुकसान ये है कि आदमी गुनाह में मुब्तला होता है.
But Maulana Sahib, for 1,400 years, the lands of Islam have contained some of the world's finest musicians. And in the courts of the great Mughals in Akbar's time, Tanzan, these are some of the greatest musicians ever to have lived. Were all these people bad Muslims?
इसको मौसीकार जो इस तरह के काम करने वाले हैं, उनको हम गलतकार कहते हैं, काफिर नहीं कहते.
The mullahs disapprove of music because they see it as a slippery slope, but also as a threat. Jugnu Mohsin publishes one of Pakistan's most respected papers.
It's all about power. The Sufi is an aspirant to power because he commands the love, loyalty and faith of the vast majority of the populace. You're not excluded. You can be a fallen woman and you can come and pray at the shrine and he will forgive you and embrace you. But the mullah's creed is extremely exclusionary. It's extremely hard. It doesn't understand human weakness. The Sufi understands human weakness. It's a bit like the message of Jesus Christ in some ways. And people will love those who forgive.
To get the full-on Sufi experience, you need to visit a shrine during its annual festival, or Urs. It celebrates the anniversary of the death of the saint, the day he met his maker. This is Bit Shah in the province of Sindh in the south of Pakistan, and the shrine of Shah Abdul Latif. With its veneration of a dead saint, party atmosphere and 24-hour music, it's just about everything that the fundamentalists most disapprove of. A regular performer here at Shah Abdul Latif's shrine is Abada Parveen. She's the most popular Sufi singer in Pakistan and one of very few women. She captivates her audience very much as Nusrat did.
दो आंखें ये हैं सामने, मगर ये सामने वाली आंख जो देखती है शायद वो पूरा ना देखती हो. तो एक दो आंखें जो हैं, एक आंख जो है वो दिल में है, बंदे के दिल में. वो देखती है जो अनदेखा मंजर हो. होली irradiations. वो अगर कलाम के थ्रू, अगर वो सूफी म्यूजिक के थ्रू किसी के अंदर पहुंचती है, तो वही सूफीज़्म है, वही पाकीज़गी है, वही स्पिरिचुअलिटी है.
Shah Abdul Latif was not only the greatest saint of Sindh, he was also its greatest poet. His verses, which are rooted in the local landscape, are known to all the people of the province. He died in 1752, and ever since then, each night, his music has been performed in the shrine where he once lived. It's as if the music of J.S. Bach had been passed on night after night since the day he died. Certainly an extraordinary sound, and one that takes some getting used to. The instrument that this Sufi brotherhood of monk musicians are slapping and plucking is called the dambour, and was invented by Abdul Latif himself. The poetry is about two lovers lost in the desert, burning with thirst. On the face of it, it's a simple love story. But what he's doing is using human desire as a metaphor for the soul's longing for God. This is an ambiguity that runs throughout Sufi poetry. These Sufi poets may have lived hundreds of years ago, but for most Pakistanis, they are still a living part of their culture. The Sufi heritage is drawn on by everyone, from writers to pop musicians.
If I was to say to you, the people of Pakistan, what's their belief of Islam, it's through Sufism that they've understood it. It's through music, it's through love poetry, it's through dance, through human interaction.
Seoni, the song by Pakistani pop group Junoon, was one of South Asia's biggest hits in 1997. The song plays on that central ambiguity in Sufi poetry between human and divine love.
Well, Sayuni in Punjabi is a metaphor for my love, soulmate, friend. It could be a metaphor for God as well. So I just wanted to take a framework of a Sufi poem, but have guitars and tablas going around with it. I've been told by a lot of radical mullahs that playing music has no place in Islam and you're on the path of damnation. And I just turn around and say to them, the fight against Sufism, it's a losing battle. You can't stop people from sharing their love of God and the way they express it.
Fez, the oldest of the imperial capitals in Morocco, dates back 1,200 years. is one of the great centres of learning of the Arab world, with a university founded over 200 years before Oxford and Cambridge. The Sufis here bind together the thought of the great poet-philosophers of medieval Fez with the lives of ordinary artisans in the city today. The tanneries here might be colourful, but the smell is foul and overpowering. Zizi, who works here, is a member of the Essawas, one of the most widespread Sufi brotherhoods in Morocco.
الخدمه كتوقع على الدار الضبط في بعض الاحيان كتكون خدمه خاصنا نقول واحد اللحظه وهذا النهار راه دايز واخا ديال الشتا راه في الليل عندي واحد الحفله غادي نمشي نفاجئ فيها فهمتي.
The Essawas are celebrated for their spectacular music.
عيد الميلاد كيجي عيد الميلاد كاين دوك الحفله ديال الصدقه يعني في العام اللي داز بسلام كان ديك الحفله ديال عيساوا حيت انا اصلا محيط بعيساوا وكنعيش في عيساوا كنديروا ديك الحفله يعني كنبردوا على كنفاجئوا على النفس ديال ديك السنه كي داز.
The ceremony in Zizi's house is loud and exuberant. It's not only an offering, but a sort of tonic for the family.
كتذهب عندنا يعني مشاكل العمل، مشاكل ديال عائليه، مشاكل روحانيه، الانسان كيكون مريض في الذات ديالو، تيكون معصب، تيكون مقبوض، كنخصو هاد الليله يعني باش كنرتاحوا.
This Moroccan Sufi music is driven by powerful rhythmic grooves. It's a sort of spiritual jazz. The oboes on top improvise repeated musical phrases, pushing up the intensity. What I find fascinating about Sufism is the way that it captures, like flypaper, local traditions. The kind of music and the kind of ecstasy we saw this evening was very specifically Moroccan or even Berber, and quite different from the sort of thing we've been seeing in Syria and Pakistan. Out in the countryside, there's something else we haven't encountered much elsewhere: women performing music. These Jalala musicians are renowned for their spiritual healing abilities. They believe that a disease that has its roots in an affliction of the spirit can be cured by the power of Sufi music. It's done by putting people, particularly women, into a trance.
هذاك المقدم باش يتسمى المقدم وهذوك الناس اللي كيكونوا كيضربوا الا دخل داك السيد كيعرفوا الريح ديالو شنو واش باغي يحمو واش باغي يعيش واش باغي ملكه واش باغي كلها على الريح ديالو كيتبع.
It might look a little freaky, even alarming at first, but it's a way of easing pent-up anxieties in a way that's acceptable in a deeply conservative society. It's a sort of safety valve, something like a rave, only with better, less monotonous music.
كيكونوا جالسين صحات لهم هما كيسمعوا داك الريح ديالهم وصافي كيفقدوا الشعور ديالهم كينوضوا لا بدا يتحيروا واخا تربطوا بالسناس ينوض ما يقدرش يجلس.
What I find inspiring about Sufism in all its forms is the way it not only bridges high and popular culture, but reaches out to other faiths. Nowhere is this clearer than in the Fez Festival of Sacred Music, a distinctly Sufi response to political developments. It was prompted by the First Gulf War and the ensuing polarization of the Arab world and the West.
Les musulmans portaient un regard caricatural sur l'Occident et l'Occident portait un regard caricatural sur l'islam. Or, je voulais créer un espace où les gens pouvaient se rencontrer et pouvaient avoir accès à la beauté intérieure de chacune des religions et de chacune des cultures. Et c'est comme ça qu'on venait à Fès, ils pouvaient percevoir aussi une autre vision de l'islam. Et à ce moment-là, il me semblait que la ville de Fès devenait une cité qui avait un message à apporter au monde d'aujourd'hui.
The idea of the Fez Festival of Sacred Music is a simple one: to juxtapose religious music from all over the world, from any creed or faith. The highlight for me was the Senegalese singer Youssou N'Dour and his Sufi-inspired album, Egypt. The song Tijaniya praises one of the great Sufi saints of Fez.
Je pense qu'il y a eu vraiment beaucoup d'amalgames, de liens qui ont été dits par des ignorants et ils ont dit violence égale proche de l'islam, ainsi de suite. Il est normal que les musulmans, de toutes les manières qui sont la majorité des gens qui pensent que la religion musulmane, avant ces problèmes-là, a toujours été pour une religion de paix et de tolérance, puissent utiliser des créneaux comme la musique pour en faire montrer et rectifier l'image de l'islam.
Je crois qu'aujourd'hui, à l'intérieur de l'islam, le soufisme ont un rôle à jouer. Le monde n'est pas uniforme et qu'il y a une richesse des traditions spirituelles et culturelles qu'il est très important de connaître et de préserver. Cela, aujourd'hui, nous en avons besoin, nous, mais surtout les générations qui vont venir, parce qu'autrement, ils vont vivre dans un monde sans âme, et ça, c'est la pire des choses qui puissent leur arriver.
Every night at the Fez Festival, there are performances from the different Sufi groups which form the heartbeat of Morocco. They're an incredible draw for Moroccans and visitors alike.
We're now in the middle of a clash of civilizations, but not one between East and West, so much as within Islam, a battle for the soul of the Muslim world. Will Muslims opt for the confrontational, puritanical approach represented in its most extreme form by Osama bin Laden?
Or can we hope instead that they will embrace the peaceful, plural, tolerant aspect of Islam, of which the Sufis form such a prominent part?
You can find out more about the varied and creative Sufi traditions by visiting the Can You Believe It website at channel4.com/culture. Well, next on 4, from Turin Breaks to the Magic Numbers, it's the BT Digital Music Awards 2005.